morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. This is actually, I'm really excited about this panel discussion for a variety of reasons, but one of them is that it's truly a global one. I'm here in the US. We've got Dave in Canada, Darrell and Christine are in Australia. So it's really neat that we're able to have this session truly span globally, which is an exciting thing. Welcome. This is our Enterprise Architecture Summit panel discussion covering the Successful Enterprise Architect's Playbook. My name is Melissa Craig. I'm the Vice President of the Americas region. So this discussion is going to look at what it takes to be a star enterprise architect in the 2020s. How's the world changing? How do the best EAs decide which challenges to tackle first and communicate clearly to global teams? Our panel is comprised of experienced enterprise architects, and it will offer insights into techniques used by architects at the top of their game. So I'm sure it'll be quite informative. And now let me go ahead and introduce our wonderful panelists to you. So first we have Christine Stevenson. She's with Penrod Consulting. She's a consultant with specialist skills and domain expertise in enterprise and business architecture, experience design, strategy development, IT management. She's certainly managed a lot of successful business units and a lot of projects for organizations across the globe. She is passionate about human-centered design experiences, and she's built her practice based on service design thinking. She's a leading coach and trainer in enterprise and business architecture, and her achievements include establishment of practices globally across multidisciplinary teams. So thanks for being with us, Christine. Next, Darrell Carr. He is an experienced enterprise architect and IT practitioner with Journey One. He has over 30 years in change-related roles. He's worked across many industries and for some of Australia's most successful organizations, in roles ranging from developer to setting technology strategy and direction. And he specializes in the bridge between business and IT. He's currently a consulting enterprise architect with Journey One, which is a Perth-based consultancy. So welcome, Darrell. So glad to have you. And then finally, we have Dave Hornford, who is with Connexium. He's based in Canada, as I mentioned earlier, and he works in a variety of industries, including financial services, oil and gas, technology, and capital-intensive industry. He usually helps clients develop and execute a roadmap in order to transform. And as a partner at Connexium, he leads the enterprise architecture capability development practice. And he's the former chair of the Open Group Architecture Forum and was a key contributor to the TOGAF Standard 10th edition. And we actually had a presentation on that earlier today. So welcome, Dave. Thanks also to you for being with us. And so with that, why don't we go ahead and get started on some questions? I know you all will have some great perspectives. So first, let's start off, whoever would like to start on this one. What does it take to be a star enterprise architect in the 2020s, and how is the role changing?
I'll jump in. What does it take to be a star enterprise architect in the 2020s? Essentially the same as what it took before. You have to provide useful advice to your stakeholders about what is changing. The fundamentals for us and how the role is changing is the depth of change that is happening to our organizations. We used to talk about a transformation as deployment of a system or launch of a new product, and now changes are restructuring operating and business models.
If I can jump in, I think that the role for enterprise architects today are opening up tremendous opportunities for this to be a really exciting career path for people, simply because we still see a lot of organizations invest in digital transformations. I think that enterprise architects have such a key, strong role in helping to support their organizations to achieve successful transformations, and therefore, for them to shine and be stars. For me, it actually means moving out of an advisory role and actually working more as a partner with the business. So no longer are you a service provider within the organization. You're actually part of the design and transformation. So helping your organization to execute your digital transformation strategy is key for you to find your role and be a superstar.
Just to add to what Christine was saying, I see a great deal more collaboration with the other change functions within an organisation going forward. So much more collaboration in terms of understanding each other's roles and how they fit together as part of the delivery of change, from strategy formation and advisory through to the execution, and how the different disciplines complement each other and can work together.
Excellent. Great. That's all really helpful. Some great feedback there for folks who are wanting to be STAR enterprise architects. So next question I would ask is, how important is technical experience or knowledge and understanding of the latest technology to being a STAR enterprise architect in today's world?
That's a good question, Melissa. I've always believed that you don't need to have come from a technical background to be a good enterprise architect, but having some knowledge of how technology can help enable a business does help. I think the key skill is not so much having that technical expertise, but being able to know when to bring in the right technical experts to help solve a problem that you've got in front of you. I think that's a more difficult skill to find amongst enterprise architects, and one that we need to keep developing in our community.
The idea that the breadth of enterprise architecture is enormous. So if you look at all of the sort of subdomains, and if you particularly focus perhaps on business architecture, you'd find practitioners that don't have a technical background. But it's incredibly important that you understand what the business purpose is of the change that you're making, regardless of what type of change that is. So I find it more important to know where to get the expertise from than to have it yourself.
I'll
that makes a lot of sense.
I'll agree with Darrell and Christine. Our best architects in our company do not have a technical background at all. What they have is a strong understanding of collaboration. Enterprise architecture is about structuring the change to the organization. That change may be involving IT technology. It also may be involving working capital intensive industries, a multi-billion-dollar spend on a facility, and understanding that facility and the drivers for that facility may be far more important than understanding how IT systems work. But Christine made a fundamental point on collaboration, and Darrell made the same point, which is knowing when to go and get or bring or engage with somebody. And the skill of collaborating and knowing how to form an answer rather than having the experience or background to state the answer is an absolute critical requirement for the job.
Yeah, and I think that's important. And it's interesting to hear you all talk about the collaboration. And I'd love to hear what other types of soft skills you think are important to being an enterprise architect. And Christine, I think you have some thoughts on this, as I think it's something that you've worked on before. So maybe we'll start with you. If you'd like to talk a little bit more about those important soft skills, that'd be great.
Thanks, Melissa. One of the reasons why I'm so passionate about human-centered design thinking is because I believe that all enterprise architecture practices need to be human-centered or people-centered, if you like. Quite often, enterprise architects get accused of being propeller heads, don't understand the language you're using, all these models might look beautiful, but they're so complex you can't make head or tail about these models. What am I supposed to do with them? And so the enterprise architects get then put in this ivory tower and far removed from the ability to offer pragmatic, practical support to the solution delivery teams within the organization. So it all comes back to, if we don't practice enterprise architecture with a people lens on, we then fall into this trap of becoming really technical in what we do and how we do it. So if we learn from the, the whole design thinking movement and the customer experience and end user experience, philosophies and principles, we need to actually eat our own dog food, to use an overused phrase, in order to offer, if we are offering the business human-centered and experience design solutions, we need to be applying it to ourselves first, because we need to understand what makes a great enterprise architecture service when we deliver it to our own customers. And hopefully by people seeing that we're practicing what we're preaching, we'll get stronger collaboration and engagement right across the organization and outside as well.
I was talking to a senior business architect a couple of weeks ago, and he made the point that the architecture isn't about you. It's not about the enterprise architect. It's about what the business purpose is. It's about meeting the needs of the stakeholders. And so one of the things that I talk about a fair bit with sort of soft skills around enterprise architecture is the ability to have empathy. So to understand what it is that's keeping your stakeholders up at night, and how you're going to be there to help solve that problem, because fundamentally we're all problem solvers. So how are you going to bring your perspectives and your skills to that problem and help make the world better for those people that are challenged with a constant barrage of messaging and change and issues that they have to deal with. So that's I think empathy is one of those things that could be developed further.
The skills that we look for in our architects, one, we already talked about it, collaboration, but one of the ones that we actually do formal training on is critical thinking. As somebody who is analyzing and understanding, being able to create and understand the quality of an argument or the quality of your argument or the quality of your analysis is absolutely a foundational skill. We actually send all of our architects to an online course from Australian University, which does critical thinking. The second thing that we work on is flexibility of language. Christine talked about models, and it's very easy to jump into your language and not be able to carry the conversation with somebody who has a completely different background. If you're looking at a transformation that involves more than one element of the business, which is very common, you have to be able to understand that when somebody talks about the customer, that may be a very different view in sales than in support. The person who buys may be very different than the person who uses. Both being used in the phrase customer. You have to, as an architect, be able to carry all of the synonyms in your head and use the right one when you're talking to somebody.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into it. It's quite a bit for folks to think about, and a lot of good things that people can work on. And that was a good point about the critical thinking from that you have everybody, the course that you have everybody do. Does anybody have any other suggestions for how, current enterprise architects or those who, may want to move into that position, how they can go about enhancing those soft skills that you talked about that are important?
I'll just add just quickly on the end of Dave's comments there about the critical thinking. So I've spoken to a number of organisations about the need to couple that with the concept of open dialogue. So you need to create a space in which those critical thinking practices can be practiced in a way that where people feel safe to be able to raise concerns about the way things are done and feel open to be able to make suggestions that can be encouraged and investigated. So there's a sort of a dual sort of requirement there. Yes, critical thinking is important, but having the safety to be able to have those conversations and challenge the status quo and come up with ideas and not be considered crazy and that sort of thing, or a troublemaker, is, I think, an important thing to encourage in organisations. Just quickly on your question around where to get those skills, how to develop them. I've, for many years now, sort of concentrated on acquiring knowledge through the experience of others, which is why I love events like this. I get to sort of sit here and listen to everybody else's perspectives and learn from them. I've tended to split my time between sort of professional development, if you like, so understanding how to do the job better, and also things about business practices, business environments, business ecosystems, that sort of thing, so professional learning. And the other half is around personal development. So understanding myself better so I can understand other people better, developing those sorts of soft skills through the practice of learning from other people's experience. So that there's that 50-50 split there of understanding the human aspect of it and understanding the business practice.
Excellent.
So I think one of the points that Darrell made about open dialogue, absolutely, you can't have critical thinking without an open dialogue. You have to be able to look at the real driver for any change and the real constraint that is keeping an organization from moving. If we joke about treating symptoms or treating the problem, and as long as you don't have an open space or an ability to have an open dialogue and look at the real issue, all you end up doing is treating a symptom. And the problem that causes an organization to need or want to transform remains. Somebody in the chat popped up a thing about learning, and absolutely, and that comes from empathy, and that comes from human-centered. Christine's human-centered. You having an ability to walk into a space, because I walk into new spaces and new organizations all the time, and being able to pick up on what the organization is challenged with and how their people are resolving, because all of these transformations, everything we do is all about people. And that gets back to your earlier question about technical experience. And we've actually found deep technical skills often are a barrier to excellence in enterprise architecture.
Dave, can I ask you a question? Sorry, Melissa, taking over your job here, but
no, go for it.
What you said just made me think about the ability to read a room and yes. What your experience is with that.
Absolutely, ability to read a room. We have a training program, and one of the first things we ask is for all of our architects is, if you don't know why you're in a room, you're there either gathering information or giving advice or some set of that. But why are you there, and what is the question that's on the table? And being able to know when you're working with a stakeholder or a subject matter expert or another advisor, where do they fit into the change cycle? I loved what you said was collaboration with all of the other change disciplines. I think we could loop around for a day talking about the importance of soft skills for enterprise architecture, because all of us, our experiences, if you don't have them, it's a struggle. Did I answer your question there, Darrell?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, thanks. And I'm sort of reflecting on the fact that when I started this journey into architecture, I would have been the last person who would have thought that what I'd end up doing is facilitating discussions, being sort of quite introverted myself, and sort of being uncomfortable going into rooms of strangers and facilitating discussions. It's not something that comes naturally to me. So it is something that can be acquired over time, but it just sort of reinforces the point I made earlier, that It's not about you as the architect. You're there to try and bring out the information that is in the heads of all of the other people in the room so that everybody can see the picture that architects tend to want to see anyway and have a general ability to see, I think, the good ones, is that big picture, the combined picture of what everybody's perspectives are. So trying to facilitate all of that information to come out and be represented in a way so everybody can understand and get on the same page, to use a worn out phrase.
In recognition of, how critical and key soft skills are for enterprise architects, my partner, Bart Papagai, who is based in Amsterdam, runs courses just focusing on soft skills for enterprise architects. And some of the topics that he covers are things like critical thinking, how do you solve problems, communication, how to have a conversation with empathy, how to negotiate in difficult situations. So there's a whole list of, things that we feel are really important as soft skills for enterprise architects. But very simply, I think that if you're an architect, you don't need to go on a course to learn these skills. As Darrell said, if you watch and observe how other people operate in meetings and in workshops, and go find yourself a mentor, somebody who you can see being a charismatic leader who continuously ends up with people following them, ask if they can take you on as a mentor so that you can build these skills and learn from your mentor as well on how to apply these skills successfully in your workplace. You might find that your mentor is not even in your organization. They may be in another organization, but definitely, getting involved in projects that allow you to practice these soft skills is really important. And never think that, your learning stopped and now you're a master of how to operate, as a successful, empathetic enterprise architect. The learning never stops. I certainly have learned a lot from Darrell over the years that I've been working with him in terms of how to communicate in very simple, easy ways to get, people to follow you from all over the world.
That's great. So, I think I know we don't want to spend too much more time on the soft skills thing, because as I think Dave may have mentioned, we could probably spend several hours on this since it's clearly so important. But there is a Gartner quote that says, in reality, architecture is 90% people and 10% architecture. Just wanted to kind of quickly get each of your thoughts, because I think that's very similar to what we've been talking about, but get your thoughts on whether that's true. It sounds like you probably all think that it may be.
So, I noticed that Sergey had popped something in the chat window as well along the same lines, saying I thought that an architect's job was to architect, not to facilitate or collaborate. Well, in order to be able to do the architecture, you need to understand the concerns, and they're not in your head; they're in other people's heads. So unless you have an ability to get that information out, expose it, make it visible to people, and one of those tools for making it visible is the architecture, then you're not going to get very far.
Any other quick comments on that?
I love that quote. It's people, because doing the architecture, doing any analysis to develop an architecture is often very easy. It's often some of the quickest pieces of the work that we do. But being able to have a conversation with our stakeholders about what the concern is and what are the criteria to select against options, and make sure that we're actually selecting against the important or critical options, as opposed to, for lack of a better word, technical choices or a financial choice, often are very, very different. Because if you're looking as an organization of improving your agility, choices that you'll make in how you design the organization and its systems will be very different than if you're trying to solve a point problem. So very much facilitation about the people, and helping others decide. I think, I don't remember if it was Darrell or Christine said, it's not about you, it's about others. You don't own the decision as an architect.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a good point. So looking a little bit more, switching gears a little bit, let's talk a little bit about who enterprise architects are reporting to, and maybe how reporting lines can promote and hold back architects. I know in a presentation from earlier that was kind of somewhat brought up in a chat. I think someone mentioned that because the presenter was not reporting into IT, it may have allowed them some different opportunities or maybe even some different challenges. So would love to hear your thoughts on reporting lines and how that can impact architects. Who'd like to go first on that one? Christine, looks like you have something you'd like to say.
Yeah, I've been in organizations where I've been an N-2 from the CIO, so fairly senior roles in very large, complex organizations. The challenge is, I don't think we've done a really good job on selling the value of enterprise architecture and where its place should be within the organization. And hence, because our conversations tend to be around digital, we're still lumped in with the IT organization rather than where we should be. So I've been working with a client here in the Queensland government, where I've actually modeled his future state capability model to have enterprise architecture sitting in the strategy value segment, because that's where I think it needs to be recognized in its ability to help the organization to transform and connect strategy with execution right across the whole change program and not just IT. Thankfully, that concept was very well received. It is a small organization, so they have the ability to make that change happen. And I'm really looking forward to seeing them realize that future state capability model. I've been in organizations where, because I've been an N-2 role, it's been incredibly difficult within the IT organization to convince my peer managers and the N-1s that we need to take a collaborative enterprise architecture approach. To them, it's new. It's a different way of working that completely destroys what they have learned as IT practitioners in terms of being able to work in their functional silos. So for someone like me to come along and say, forget your organization silos, how can we come together and work as one team to help support the business to change? That message is still very poorly received within the IT organization. So I find that, I'm always torn between, is it my job to educate my peers and my senior managers that enterprise architecture is all about collaboration and here's a great way to do it? Or is it the senior managers' roles and responsibilities to stay up to date on what value enterprise architecture can bring to the entire organization? So I tend to spend an awful amount of time having these battles with my own IT colleagues on where enterprise architecture adds the most value. I don't think IT organizations are mature enough yet today to understand what enterprise architecture is and where should it actually be positioned. Forget about that conversation. I think if we can work on all our IT colleagues understanding that enterprise architecture is not an IT thing, it's an enterprise design thing. And therefore we need to, regardless of where the team is located, we need to actually change our mindsets and work out how can we be most effective where we work from, and how can we get the whole IT organization to support us and not fight with us all the time to actually add value and make a difference. Sorry, a real hot button of mine. Where does enterprise architecture need to be located?
I don't think you're the only one. Who else would like to chat about that a bit?
From my
Go on,
experience,
Dave.
it doesn't matter too much where the architects report if they'll do their jobs. If they're going to engage with change leaders, if they're going to engage with helping a change leader move the organization forward, working N-2 in IT, working in a strategy organization, you can work at that from anywhere. Now, some of my experience in that is I get to cheat. I am almost always a consultant. I'm almost always brought into an organization. When I have worked inside an organization, however, I've pursued the exact same engagement model, which is it's my job to facilitate and enable and support change. What I observe is that a lot of architects, a lot of people with the job title architect who might not be architects, wish they had a different reporting structure, because what they're actually doing is promoting a very parochial line of interest. I see a lot of people with the title architects promoting an IT issue, and they wish they had a bigger platform to do it rather than helping the organization. Sorry, Darrell, I jumped in on you and then probably gave you a thought.
Yeah, no, yeah, definitely did, Dave. You're making me think of all sorts of things today. It's great. And just to sort of a point that Laurie was just making in the chat session about it feeling good to understand that they're not alone in these challenges. That's one of the great things about having these types of events, in that we actually get together and talk about the problems that we're facing, and we realise that we've all got the same sorts of problems. So it's really good to be able to exchange that knowledge. I was going to mention that one of the things that I do sort of outside my day job, if you like, is as the editor for the Enterprise Architecture Professional Journal. And we ran a survey about 4 years ago now where we got information about reporting lines for architects. And about 75% of architects were reporting into a technology leadership position. And that was actually lower than I was expecting because traditionally everywhere I'd seen, they pretty much point into the CIO or similar. But in terms of where they should point, well, I've always had the opinion that it has a strategic aspect to the role. A COO might be a good place to put them, if not the CEO from a strategic advisory perspective. And that's only increasing in importance. So the question I'd ask in response to the question, if that's allowed, is if you're in the technology function, what's the technology for? Once you figure out the answer to that question, you realise probably doesn't matter as long as you're having that influence.
Yeah, it's a good perspective and a good way to think about it. I like that. So sounds like we've got a lot of things for folks to think about related to reporting lines. And as we've all said, it's good to hear that folks are not alone. I'm sure that's helpful to hear. But want to also ask, I think you all probably touched on this a little bit in your responses, but related to, outside of the IT organization, what other relationships are important to build in order to affect change?
That's a really, sorry, Darrell.
Go right ahead.
Sure. So one of the areas that I've had the most success with as an enterprise architect is actually working really closely with the HR team. A lot of the organizations I've worked in have been operationally excellent organizations, so I haven't had the need to invest very heavily in customer experience, but they invested very heavily in end user experience in employee experience, because it's the employees in an operationally excellent organization are the ones that are delivering your value at the end of the day. So focusing on employees meant that I had to look at who are the stakeholders I need to work with, and found that for this particular very large mining organization, they had about 9 different HR teams, from recruitment right through to employee well-being and conducting satisfaction surveys and all of the typical HR functions. Because it was really important to ensure that employees were having great experiences at work, because our philosophy was, or our hypothesis was, that happy employees are productive employees. So if we give them the tools that are simple, easy, and enjoyable to work with when they come to work, then they're going to be extremely productive employees as well. So it made sense to go and work very strongly and build a massive partnership with the HR department, and to get involved in every single project that they had on their plate, whether it had a technology component or not, to get involved and work with them in partnership to help them deliver the changes that they wanted to all employees in the company. And by doing that, we were able to demonstrate what a successful collaborative partnership model looked like. And as soon as we could demonstrate that, the knocks on the door didn't stop. Could your team please come and help me? So we were getting calls from the operations team now saying, hey, can you come and do what you did for HR? Come and do that with me. So it gave us a very quick way of being able to demonstrate value and to prove that our partnership engagement model worked, for us to get those calls to be included in many more projects than we would ever have imagined.
Dave, I think you had something that you wanted to add about that as well.
Who to work with? We routinely look for business operations. Any opportunity we have to work with, I don't need to work with the CEO, CIO. If I can work with a COO, somebody in business operations, I'm in at the center of what the organization is doing. Whether it is a services organization, a manufacturing organization, a mining organization, we're in where the business is actually functioning and able to move itself forward. And we're able to look at what are the real challenges, whether it is, I've got a break between R&D and product, I've got a break between sales and support. Those are the breaks that lead you to improve an organization radically. So any opportunity to get to business operations for us is where we make a significantly greater impact.
Great. Darrell, did you have any thoughts on where the most important relationships to establish might be?
How long have we got, Melissa? Look, I'd probably make the point that if you look at an organisation as having a steady state function, so there's the operations and there's a change function, and there's a need for us to figure out how to optimise both of those, and also the relationship between them. So if you look at that, well, it's everybody. The architect, the poor architect, should never be in their office, because they should always be out sort of engaging with other people and trying to form those relationships and developing a sense of trust and understanding how to solve problems, but also sort of deliver on promises as well. So everybody and anybody.
Great. All right. Well, that's really helpful advice. Let's switch gears again and talk about frameworks. So would love to hear from each of you which frameworks you think are most popular or useful in 2022. And then also, maybe do you think that frameworks are old school? Are they even relevant anymore? So would love to hear each of your thoughts on that. Darrell, do you want to start with this one?
Sure. Okay, so frameworks. I go back to my point earlier about learning from other people's experience. So if you look at the frameworks, what it is a distillation of experience. And if you look at something like what the Open Group's done in terms of the forum and the sorts of organisations that have come together and practitioners that have come together to try and get that knowledge, that real world experience, and distill that down into a guideline. There's enormous value in there. There's a whole separate discussion we can have about utilization of that knowledge and how you acquire the skills and the knowledge yourself to be able to apply it in a given situation. But frameworks can develop sort of a bad name in some circles. And if they're looked at as an acquisition of knowledge and a standardization of approach and terminology, then there's a significant amount of benefit available to practitioners in that regard.
Great. Any other comments, Dave or Christine?
We always break a framework conversation down into a question of what is the type of framework. And we look at, there essentially are three types of frameworks. One of them is a comprehensive framework, something like Zachman or TOGAF. Then there are industry-specific frameworks, BIAN, DODAF, FIAF, and then there are domain-specific frameworks, something like SABSA for security. All of them are designed to facilitate, as Darrell said, building knowledge. Most of those frameworks, when you look at industry and domain, are all about having a reference or a way to consistently describe an architecture to address the standard problem in the industry space, or in SABSA's case, security architecture space. If you think about DODAF, the Defense Department Framework, we use that all the time in oil and gas, because DODAF is designed about interoperability of long-lived systems. When I'm in oil and gas, I've got a refinery, I've got a pipeline, I've got facilities that are long-lived systems that are very expensive, and they're not going to change just because somebody's doing a change downstream. How do I do interchange between those? If you have a problem in duplication, you look at something like FIAF, the U.S. Federal Enterprise Architecture Framework, which is all about describing your world so that you can find duplication. You'll never find duplication because it's called the program for X and the program for Y. What you'll find is when you describe them using a consistent terminology, oh, these are both people serving events. So a lot of the framework discussions we've been involved in are people find one that is working for them, and it's usually because of the problems they're trying to solve. And if you're solving a problem that the framework was designed to support, you learn faster. And if you learn faster, you find the issue that needs to change quicker, and you find the barriers to the change quicker. We view a lot of what we do basically as knowledge engineering or knowledge manufacturing.
Great thoughts. Christine, did you have any thoughts on this topic?
Yes, just to borrow from some of what Dave has said, and what frameworks are actually here for. What do they help us do? I've actually seen a lot of people fail in the way they practice enterprise architecture because they take a framework, whichever one you pick. TOGAF being one of the most popular frameworks that people like to adopt. The failure occurs because you think you can just take that framework and implement it in your organization just like that. And some magic is supposed to happen, and all of a sudden you have an enterprise architecture practice. It's really important for us, as Dave said, to understand what framework do you use for a start, and how should you actually use the framework. So TOGAF was never designed to be just taken out of a box and shoved into organizations. It is really meant and helps a lot of organizations understand how to take the structured approach and adapt your practice based on your industry, based on your maturity and a number of other factors, and to work out how are you going to practice enterprise architecture, because TOGAF will never give you that answer. So, which basically means that you need to supplement your practice with a number of other frameworks that aren't enterprise architecture frameworks, but are solution development, solution delivery frameworks, change management frameworks out there that you supplement the TOGAF framework with in order to now practice enterprise architecture. So organizations are meant to be using these frameworks as references. They are not the prescription of how you do enterprise architecture. You got to work out, as Dave said, what problem are you trying to solve? And therefore, what framework, what method, what techniques are you going to bring in? How it fits into this framework and complements it will be the way that you then practice enterprise architecture.
So if I can just sort of add to that, this brings up a favourite topic of mine. It's a thing that I've come to call the mass customization problem, which is the concept that a framework, and if you look at TOGAF as an example, it's been created to cover an enormous variation of circumstance. So it is a mass of a body of knowledge across multiple industries and practitioners and different types of organisations. So it covers everything. So it's suitable for everyone, but it's not applicable to any given circumstance. So because of the sort of uniqueness of each organisation. So then you require customization of that knowledge within the context of the environment that you're in. And that's not a framework problem. That's a discipline problem. That's something that we need to talk about as practitioners, to understand how to acquire the knowledge to make the best use of the frameworks, because the frameworks are just there to provide that reference.
Yeah, that's an important distinction. So I know we've only got 10 minutes left, so I'm actually going to jump over to a question that we received that actually goes along with one of the questions that we had prepared. Want to talk a little bit about influencing executives, maybe, like and how to present CIO-ready information. One of our attendees mentioned that architecture is often equated to just documentation. And how do you kind of help the leaders to understand that it's about more than that? So kind of both of those questions kind of going together, at the same time. Kind of how do you influence C-suite type leaders, and how do you present information effectively to them?
Answer their problem. Most of the time when people want to talk to the C-suite, what they're looking for is for the C-suite to provide their support to the person who wants to influence this problem. All senior leaders have spent their entire career being able to spot these people and isolate them. Because if you are a senior leader in an organization, you have a responsibility to run its operations, drive its sales, do whatever. You aren't there to drive somebody else's agenda. So the number one thing is, what is it that, in order to influence them, it's what are they trying to do and what can you do to help their agenda, as opposed to what can they do to help your agenda.
A great way to look at it. And Christine, I see you nodding quite a bit with that. Do you want to jump in and add some points to that?
So having taught, TOGAF for a number of years, one of the most important things that I used to tell all my students, and I tell people today, the success of enterprise architecture and how well you do it comes down to two things. Who are your stakeholders and what are their concerns? If you get those two wrong, you can forget practicing enterprise architecture, because you're just going to deliver absolutely nothing of value. And I say that because a lot of people, and honestly, I've done so many projects, one of the worst kept artifacts in any project is your stakeholder management workbook, right? If we could just lift our game right at the start of the project, in terms of identifying who our stakeholders are, what are their concerns, and how are we going to address these concerns throughout the project will mean that we deliver amazing outcomes. Doesn't matter who we're delivering it to. The fact that we know our stakeholders and their concerns, and it helps us to guide how are we going to address their concerns and communicate it back to them in a way that is simple and easy and enjoyable. Because what you don't want to do is to give all your stakeholders map shock because you've created these terribly complex models that nobody understands. Forget whether it's the C-suite or whether it is a frontline worker in your organization. If you haven't made that connection to the people you are doing this work for, your practice will fail. I will not be successful.
I think just adding to that, yeah, just adding to that, we sort of talked earlier about things like empathy and reading a room and being able to facilitate to get concerns out of the audience, the other people in the room, and get their knowledge as well. So it all sort of ties back together, I guess, those topics. But also point out that it's important if you're looking at the organisation, and I've got to say, of all of the things that are in TOGAF, the one thing I've used consistently and most often is the stakeholder map. So just getting that out in the first instance, understanding what the organisation is, how it functions, who are the players, who are the ones that you need to sort of have the most influence over, that sort of thing. Just get that out into a form where you can refer to it and develop a communication plan around that. But while you're doing that, don't just look at the operational side of the business. Have a look at the change function as well. So I talked earlier about the steady state function, the change function in organisations. Have a look at those change stakeholders as well, because they're really important. And there's been a fair bit of commentary in the chat session about things like portfolio and program and portfolio governance and how enterprise architecture relates to that. They're all change functions. It's really important that you develop relationships with those and understand what they're trying to do, and understand that those practitioners are also trying to get time with the senior leaders in the organisation and tell them that they know how to solve all their problems. So it'd be a really good idea if all of these disciplines actually talk to each other and unified their message and went with one consistent approach to solving change in that organisation.
That's great, excellent advice. So we're coming really close to time, but what I would love to hear from each of you right before we close out is just a quick takeaway of what you think is the most important thing, what advice you have for enterprise architects in the 2020s to really stand out, to be, star EAs. So real quick, if you could each just kind of give your last minute quick takeaways, that would be excellent.
The first thing that came to mind was, don't be a star. It's not about you. It's about everybody else. It's about what you're there to do. So I know the question is supposed to be about how to ensure that you have a sort of successful career path in the enterprise architecture space, but fundamentally understand that it's not about you. And if you actually solve enough problems for other people, the rest of it will take care of itself.
A very dear colleague of mine, Darrell, who lives in Perth as well, says to me that when architects join his team, the first conversation he has with them is to say there are no superheroes in this practice. So take your underpants off from the outside and put them back on inside. So that really gets them thinking. So I love that. There are no heroes. But my advice to a lot of EAs is, when you're up against a lot of resistance and people are questioning, what your credibility and what value you bring to the table, go and look for projects that you can do and engage this approach, which I call architecture by stealth, right? Don't wait and ask for permission to do enterprise architecture. There are literally 100 change projects in your organization or more, that can do with your unique set of skills and your insights. So build relationships with people who are delivering this change and perhaps even struggling to get change across the line, and see how you can get on board to help them. Don't come at it with a mentality which says, oh, I need to have budget allocated for me to do this work. If you're truly passionate about seeing enterprise architecture successful in your organization, do it for free. Let your passion drive the work that you do in your organization. Find those projects. And as people start seeing these projects were successful because you were involved in it, you will end up getting so many knocks on your door, you'll end up with a condition that I call victim of your own success. And that's a good place to be. Another problem to solve, but first let's become victims of our success rather than standing there and being shown the door.
Excellent advice.
I'll
Dave?
just net it down to 2 words: servant leadership. Enterprise architects don't own budget. They don't own change. They don't own departments. They're there to help others. As Christine said, find anyone who is needing useful help and understand your business cycle and understand your authority cycle.
Great. You all have given such great advice. And to the audience, I hope you've enjoyed hearing from these experts as much as I have. Thank you all so much, Christine, Dave, and Darrell. This has been wonderful, and really appreciate you all joining and providing so many great thoughts and feedback and advice to everyone listening. And thank you all to the audience. Thank you all for joining us.